A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 76. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How is it going?
It is going well.
Good.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I am fine. I am fine. I am, we can't rest on our laurels of our 75th episode.
That's right.
So I feel like there's a lot of interesting Star Wars-y stuff to talk about.
Sure.
I was going to try to we should talk about something about life or something today, but because we never do on the show. But then I'm like, I can't really think of anything interesting going on in my life that I want to talk about on a podcast.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Do you have anything interesting you want to talk about life?
Not really. I've just been working a lot, so I don't have any real stories to share. I'm reading The Lathe of Heaven. I don't know if you've read that.
Yes, I love Lathe of Heaven.
Which takes. I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask you is if you've read it because it takes place up in your neck of the woods.
Yes.
So
obviously,
I'm about a third of the way through that.
He's referring to the great Ursula K. Le Guin.
Yes.
I think that's I think she wrote that in the 70s.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, we won't talk too much about it since you're only a third of the way through. I mean, I remember reading about 10, 15 years ago, and I enjoyed it a lot. There's actually, I'm looking at it right now. I have a DVD, which it might be hard to track down when you're all done. They did an adaptation of it for PBS back in the what year was this? Boy, I need to go see my eye doctor. But anyway, it was kind of done low budget. It had Bruce Davidson, which I think you guys would know from what is it, Crazy Mary something. I mean, he's been in X-Men movies, and the minute you saw him, you'd know who he was. Anyway, it was like one of those things where they made it and on video, and it almost got thrown in a dumpster. So they found was it's interesting. It's kind of an interpretation of the story. It's not a direct thing, but I would always suggest it over the one that they did. A&E did a version of it with Lucas Haas as George Orr. Lisa Bonet is in it, and then the psychiatrist is played by James Caan. But so people who aren't familiar, it's the story. It's basically it's a science fiction story, but it's kind of more of a metaphysical or a psychological science fiction story about.
Right.
Spoiler alert! It's about a young man whose dreams seem to have a more of effect on the outside world than you would expect, and how the psychiatrist might react to that. But I'll leave it at that. I would just definitely say it's a recommended book for people.
Yep. So I have to try to finish that up before I start Empire's End, which came out today.
Oh yeah,
which we'll get to later.
Well, speaking of Star Wars, I mean, I guess the hottest news, which I think you were pretty much had thought that this was going to happen anyway, because you'd said you were thinking the Star Wars show would probably announce it, is that it looks like March 24th is going to be the release date for the digital Rogue One digital
release.
Yeah, I mean, what is it now? It's not a physical thing. It's like it's the
digital release.
Digital, yeah.
Rogue One drops in iTunes.
I just don't feel
March 24th.
I don't really feel comfortable about saying digital release on this show, but since I've stopped marking it explicit.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's that kind of weird thing where I thought, well, it's about 10 days, but so the physical copy comes out on April 4th.
Yeah.
And I guess that's actually they're gonna have a 2D and a DVD and
3D.
So they're not doing a deluxe edition, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say.
I mean, it is going to come with extras,
right?
Which I mean, the initial release of The Force Awakens was pretty sparse, as I recall.
Yeah, there was some deleted scenes and a documentary.
Yeah, but then it was like the next iteration of it is where you got the commentary and some extras. And so with Rogue One, it looks like they're just going to go ahead and include some extras with the Blu-ray, including extras about how they made the digital Leia and Tarkin, a featurette about John Knowles' original pitch for the movie, featurette about the director's design choices and the look of the film, one about, profiles of the actors in the movie and the characters they play, and then a featurette about all of the Easter eggs, the Star Wars Easter eggs that are in the movie. So, the push in on the blue milk and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so if you've never heard of a website called BuzzFeed, this is all going to be new information to you.
It would be great if
Cinema Blend or whoever's doing.
I was going to say, if people out there remember the show Pop-Up Video, they should just do that. Like, there should be a version of the movie where you play it and then just like a little window pops up in the middle of the movie saying like, yeah, there's a reason they're pushing it on this blue milk. It's because a character in episode 4 was drinking it became a thing. Or when Bail Organa says he's going to return to Alderaan, he's not going to live for very long. Stuff like that.
Yeah, since you brought it up, man, I'm jumping right into my old cantankerous ways. There's not that push in on the blue milk.
It's so gratuitous. It's that's like the early part of the movie. It took me out of it the first couple times I saw it, and then I just ignored it. Like it's just so gratuitous.
Yeah, and I have this feeling on some ways that somebody could make a case like, well, actually it's a double Easter egg because we're referencing the blue milk and we're doing the push in referencing about how gratuitous Boba Fett's cameo in the special edition was. So, you know what I mean? You could be like, we intended it to be like that. But
I think that might be one level too many for their thinking behind it. I think it was just like, hey, let's put some blue milk in the movie.
Hey, let's put some blue
and make
milk.
sure that people notice it.
We didn't. I always wonder. They spend a lot of time making like references to blue milk on. I've heard so many different. It's been referenced in audio dramas and
Right.
and novels, but they never mention like the weird scrambled eggs Luke was eating.
Right. Whatever. He's like, if you go back and watch like animated shows, unless they're referencing like a specific kind of food, like unless there's a line in there about like, oh, these ribs are delicious on it, and then the food they're eating is just this like nondescript grayish yellowish mush. Because for animation, like, why would they bother to animate like a real meal? And I feel like that's kind of what they did in episode 4. Where it's like, it doesn't matter what they're eating, just give them like powdery scrambled eggs that you make with water. Like
Exactly.
Just whatever's cheap and people are not going to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Aunt Beru was much of a cook. Either that or,
I think she did the best with what she had, considering they lived on Tatooine.
Yeah, I mean, considering the only time they ever reference any kind of like natural foodstuffs is, well, they never tell you where the blue milk. They claim, I've heard like apocryphally that it's bantha milk, but how do you milk a bantha? That's a lot of hair. Actually, I don't know why I guess
bantha milk would be similar to yak's milk, right? Which
Oh yeah,
I don't think is very wide. I don't think it's very widespread.
Yeah, unless you live in Tibet.
Right.
Well, I think they don't do yak. They do yak. Yeah, they do yak milk and yak butter, and in their tea, it's like kind of a. Well, it's a kind of a pretty high end food stuff for them. It's like the cornerstone of their diet. And,
yes.
But
according to Wikipedia, blue milk is also known as bantha milk. Rich blue-colored milk produced by females, banthas. It was also used for ice cream, butter, and yogurt. Notably available on outer rim planets such as Tatooine, Lothal, and Lamu.
So you got
it
bantha
showed
milk.
Up in Rebels. It showed up in the prequels.
So where the heck do the Ursos get bantha milk? If they've been living out on that,
I guess
that planet, was that Lamu? Is that the name of the planet they were on?
Yeah.
Did they have a bantha out back? See, that's what they should have done. They should have had a bantha. Like, that would have been a cool callback.
Yeah.
In the back, like some kind of bantha looking thing.
Yeah.
Because they have to. If you had a true farm, I mean, what was Galen Urso actually growing? See,
I don't know. I mean, in the given the setting, it was just growing a lot of green moss, I guess.
Oh my god!
Is he a moss farmer?
I'm half patting myself on the back because this is such a bad joke. But I mean, like, if you wanted to do a rewrite of that opening Rogue One scene, it would be like this thing where it's like, where, Krennic is like, a farmer. Why are you doing this? Like, I don't know. I'm not what I used to be, or whatever. It's like I've been trying to feed my family with this farm and this bantha, and I can't milk it for love nor money. And it's been like, Galen, that's a male bantha. I told you I've lost my mind.
I think that's the robot chicken.
That's the Freddy got
version.
It's the Freddy got fingered version of Rogue One. Is what it really is. Yeah. And I apologize to my listeners for even going down that road.
I'm sure our listeners love that movie and are happy.
Yes,
to hear references.
I'm literally looking at I'm like, you mentioned Lay the Heaven. I saw it. Freddy got fingered. I can see it right. I can actually reach out and touch it. Anyway, that was a bad joke. But no, I mean, you think about it, it's like they don't. That's the thing about Star Wars that I kind of love. It's like, okay, they have an excuse for everything, but then if you really sit down and think about it, it's like, oh, they haven't really thought it out. They still leave a lot of these weird gaps, like, where do you get bantha milk on a planet that doesn't have banthas, and what exactly does Galen Urso grow out there? And then even if you think, well, okay, so Tatooine, they basically don't have a lot of water, so they have to have moisture evaporators, but they have this blue milk, which I guess obviously is so great that it actually gets exported, which I don't know how you do it if there's basically every Tusken Raider, they kind of have overtaken the banthas as their personal transportation. And then in Attack of the Clones, you have in Dexter's Diner, he mentions Jawa juice. So it's kind of like the great untold story of Star Wars that, people all over the galaxy are appearing on Tatooine, somehow juicing and milking all the indigenous people. Yeah, and feeding the Republic.
They need liquid somehow. They're not really getting it from the landscape. Whatever they can milk, whatever they can juice.
They have to juice your Jawa.
Yeah.
I don't know how you put it in a nice press or something.
Right.
All right. Enough of this silly twaddle. I know.
Right. So Easter eggs in case you have just gotten into Star Wars. Rogue One was like your first or second Star Wars movie you ever saw. That Easter egg featurette is for you.
Yes. And then there's
so that's go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to say that there's one big thing here going that I kind of I'm a little not surprised, but am surprised at simultaneously, just because the questions that things like this would open up is that there's no teasing of any deleted scenes, which was kind of a big thing for, The Force Awakens, where everybody was kind of like, well, I mean, I think it's people love loved that movie so much that they wanted anything they could get. And,
Right.
you know, Force Awakens obviously
And
had...
they really, I mean, really only got, what, like 2 to 3 deleted scenes?
I think all told, when I'm looking at it, it's about 5 or 6. There's one, the whole...
Okay.
With the Unkor Plutt thing that showed up on the Blu-ray of the 3D.
Right, I guess that would be maybe a couple of scenes.
Which I finally saw, and I was like, hey, I'm really glad I didn't spend $35 for this Force Awakens video. Although if it gets down to like 25, I'll probably just buy it because for my collection. But it's like the whole thing where it's like, oh, Chewbacca rips Unkar Plutt's arm off, and it was so kind of done in this cartoonish way where it was like, which I understand, you can't have blood squirting everywhere and whatnot, but it's almost like he's one of the Unkar Plutt is like a force masher or whatever, those toys where you can just rip the arms off. It's like a bloodless thing where his arm gets ripped off and thrown across the Maz Kanata's bar.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, nothing. The only thing that the deleted scenes had that I kind of wish that had been integrated in the movie is the fact that Princess Leia was actually shown a little earlier in the film, but it was such an underwhelming scene. I can understand why J.J. Abrams decided not to do it. It was kind of like a tease almost that she was interacting with. What's her, like, one of the character, Kor Salah, who had been in Bloodline. She was kind of like, she was an aide in the New Republic or whatever. And then there was one great shot where it's actually not a great scene, but it kind of fills in a little question that some people may have had as to how much Han Solo kind of understood about Finn when he met him. Because, you know, Finn would say things and then, like, Han Solo would kind of look at him and you were like, well, what does that mean? And then he implies, like, well, you know, women always find out or whatever. And then there's a joke where they're after Rey is run off because she doesn't want to take up Luke's mantle, and the First Order attacks, and they're in the underneath, and the guns are pulled on them. First Order stormtroopers come down the steps and they pull a gun on Han and Chewie, and then he said something, and Han says something, is like, oh, is this about the boots? And then, like, Finn goes, oh, that's how you knew I wasn't with the Resistance, because Finn's still wearing the boots, his stormtrooper boots, and I think that was kind of a nice little thing. But unfortunately, you'd have to take the whole scene, which I think was really goofy. It was like this thing where they go stop in the name of Supreme Leader Snoke, and then Han does a kind of thing where he goes, huh? Supreme Leader Smoke? I've never heard of him. It's just like kind of like JJ's.
It's a little too broad.
Yeah, it's like JJ's take on the, you know, everything's okay situation, normal. We've had a slight weapons malfunction. It just doesn't work. It doesn't. It's not as snappy as the Willard Hayek, Gloria Katz dialogue from A New Hope. But
so it sounds like we're not really getting any of that with this Blu-ray, as you say, which is interesting. I mean, on the one hand, you have all the reshoots, and, you know, I don't want to go so far as to say there's like a conspiracy and they're intentionally suppressing those, but, you know, given that they changed some things and went in slightly different directions with the characters, or they were basically like, all right, we need to fix the first and third acts and give these people more backstory, I kind of wonder what they lost. And it could be that they didn't really lose much. I mean, usually deleted scenes that show up on the DVDs, it's stuff that was shot, and even, you know, maybe was in the rough cut, and then just, you know, when they made further and further edits got cut out. And so, you know, if the stuff from the reshoots, if that didn't even make it into the rough cut, then maybe it's not really in a shape that they want to show it. That they feel like, yeah, you know, we're confident, you know, all of this stuff, you know, the effects might not have been finished, or, you know, whatever else. On the other hand, and then in addition to that, you also have, you know, all the footage that Gareth Edwards shot just because he thought it would look cool, you know, that they kind of did. They're like, well, let's just see what this looks like, and, you know, let's do it this way, or let's put the camera here and just kind of go. And that, I think, would be kind of interesting to see, just to kind of see what he was thinking about, it would get maybe a little more insight into his process and the way he was thinking about this movie and thinking about making a Star Wars movie. I don't know that would be super interesting to see. Beyond that, though, maybe if they had still photos of that kind of stuff, that that could be interesting too. But I also don't know how packed with extras and features, physical copies of Blu-rays are these days. Because I'm not in the Blu-ray market myself. You would know better than I would.
Yeah.
How does this compare to kind of other similar movies and releases that, the Marvel movies or whatever else, are they putting a lot of that kind of stuff on Blu-ray and Star Wars, Lucasfilm just isn't, or is this kind of in keeping with industry trends?
I would say with keeping within industry trends, and to like give, basically what you're getting most of the time is EPK type items.
Yeah.
I would say that the even comparatively Rogue One and the Force Awakens release seems, if you want to compare it to say this, anything that the Marvel movies have done, I would actually consider it slightly more generous. And because it's like I haven't listened to a single commentary of a Marvel movie, because it's just like, I don't find most of those superhero movies to be interesting enough to sit through a commentary on. It's not like I feel like, I really want to know how they made this choice. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the industry in general. It's like, I have kind of slowed buying a lot of stuff on home video myself, but Black Friday, of course, if everything's down to like $5, it's almost the same price to rent it. So I did pick up stuff, but yeah, generally it's, there's not a lot. I mean, there's companies that do great work with older catalog titles like Shout Factory or Scream Factory, which they have done some great reissues of some John Carpenter films, and those are always great. But yeah, I mean, as far as other stuff, it's like I bought a Amazon had a deal on the Twin Peaks, the full, what do they call it, the original series, Fire Walk with Me and the Missing Pieces, and I was all excited, and I got it for a deal, and then I'm grabbing it here, and then in the back, I found out later that like part of the reason it was so cheap is that they took off a full disc of extras. Oh, which was all these documentary things where they were talking kind of about a retrospective of Fire Walk with Me, which I'm like, oh, come on. But then it was like, well, it was a difference between $34 for this, and if I wanted that 10th disc, the version that was with the 10th disc, it was $89. So I had to kind of make a command decision and just be like, of course, I probably should have just realized, they've been on Netflix for like the last 3 years. I didn't actually need to buy them, but oh well. But yeah, I was, at first I would think like, they don't like when The Phantom Menace came out on DVD, it was such a, kind of a big thing where it was like, well, there's like an extra lap in the pod race and an extra little scene here and there. It's like, then we have like 6 deleted scenes that had actually been completed, like the special effects and all that stuff. So it wasn't like a thing where all of a sudden you're looking and it's like, oh wait, there's a blue tarp over there, and that's supposed to be a Trade Federation tank or something. But as time went on, I noticed when they would do the subsequent releases, they would give like by the episode 3, the deleted scenes, they had massively unfinished, where it was like, Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen running around on tarps, and there was a whole sequence where they actually ended up in a fuel tank where they were all like wet and stuff, and you're like, wait a second, I will say this, George at least put on stuff like, because they had I forget her name. There was a Jedi master, and she dies like 2 or 3 different times in the Revenge of the Sith, but they actually deleted every reference to it. And I forget the character's name. Oh,
I know who you're talking about.
And all the deleted versions, all the different ways of her dying are actually on the DVD. So it's like, well, at least George had he would actually go, well, I tried it this way, I tried it that way, which kind of coming back to the Rogue One, it makes me wonder. It's like, well, And maybe this is just the way Disney does business. It's like, it would be kind of fun to be like, hey, they could have a little thing like, hey, as movies are a process, and they could show like excerpts maybe from like, oh, initially we had this idea that, Jin was, in constant contact with Saw Gerrera, and this is where the scene went originally. And then later we found out it'd be better if we'd drawn her out into this where they'd actually been separated, and here's how it goes. I would love that as a Star Wars nerd, and I think anybody who would actually go to the trouble of buying these things, and even sometimes buying them multiple times, would love that kind of stuff. I just don't think the home video market is set up for that anymore. I don't think people care. And then,
which is interesting that I guess we get so much of that behind the scenes stuff on YouTube or whatever else, quickly enough before the Blu-ray comes out, that by the time the Blu-ray comes out, everyone's like, well, it's just, do I want to own a physical copy of this movie or not? And, fewer and fewer people are buying physical copies of things. And so, I guess at one point the industry's view of this was, well, let's pack a bunch of extras on this thing to encourage people to buy it. And now it seems like maybe they're moving in the other direction. I think it also ties to kind of the lack of behind the scenes or making of material that we're getting in general, right? We're not getting books about the making of these movies. We're getting the art of these books, and we're getting the visual dictionaries or visual guides, whatever you want to call them, that give you more backstory on who these characters are, kind of manufactured after the fact. But those art of Rogue One, art of The Force Awakens, that's the closest thing we're getting really to kind of behind the scenes, backstory on the development of these movies. And even then, that's not really their purpose. You only get that as they're talking about the evolution of different designs and of different characters. And okay, well, at one point, we had this Jedi killer character, and so here's what all the designs were. And then, we figured out it was going to be this particular character, and so, we were able to repurpose that character as the Bothian Death Gang, and then give, the Knights of Ren, here are some designs for that. Once we figured out that was going to be part of the story, but that's not really a full telling of the development of this thing, and you don't get all the notes of the script conferences that George Lucas had with Lawrence Kasdan and Richard Marquand. You're not getting that kind of stuff either, which they're I think a lot of Star Wars nerds like ourselves, that's really like where you can sink your teeth into how these things were made and really dig into deepening your relationship with these movies. But so the lack of DVD and Blu-ray extras, I think, is kind of it fits within the industry trends, but then it also fits within kind of the Lucasfilm trends of kind of bare bones behind the scenes stuff. And maybe as I've said with those books, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, we will get more of that material out there. But at least for now, they are kind of letting the movie stand on their own, which is that I can respect that on some level too, right? That's another way to go and just say, look, the movies are out there, enjoy the movies, and we'll give you a little more material explaining who these characters are, and maybe a little bit about all the work that went into the character designs and the ship designs, but you're not going to get 300-page coffee table book about how this was made with the entire script in it. We're not getting that anymore, I don't think, at least not for a while.
Yeah, and I think that's in some ways, being a fan of this kind of stuff, you kind of, and as you get older or whatever, you kind of have to realize, like, well, they're not going to always approach it the way they did in the past, and I think that's going to touch on to some of this stuff from the Toy Fair thing I was going to talk about, but yeah, it's the idea where it's like, there's all kinds of stuff, trappings of the old ways that they did things that I would love. I would love that if they still did, these cut down the story of kind of things where they used the real sound effects and had like the records that I liked as a kid. I see that. I think it's Blast Points is doing a show this week about where they talk about those, and it's like, yeah, I love those make Star Wars things, but they never did them for the prequels. They did them, but they were like, very different. I actually bought one, and it was like, I was like, oh, this is great. They did them just like the old days. And then I listened. It was literally geared for like a 3-year-old. And I'm like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
These other ones, they would cut the 2-hour movie down to about 50 minutes and have like, our show starts off with a clip from the original. Roscoe Lee Brown would narrate it. And I used to love those, but yeah, you can't really make a justification, be like, oh yeah, kids are really going to enjoy this because they know that like in 3 months the thing's going to be on video and they're going to be on the headrest of every minivan from here to Timbuktu. So it's like, why spend the money to edit it, hire a narrator, market it, and whatnot. I mean, it's a great throwback, but maybe deleted scenes and extensive behind the scenes things, maybe that's just not the direction they're going, or they want to leave something behind so they can do, prestige kind of, releases. I mean, like the only other big, movie property I can think of that, does multiple releases, like the Harry Potter series. Like, I think they're just doing the 4K versions. And of course, again, there will be 4K releases of Star Wars down the road. Disney hasn't gone into 4K yet, as far as I remember. But when they do, all this stuff's going to be available in 4K.
Right.
So
and what's his name? Gareth Edwards. Didn't he say, oh, there's a 4K edition of A New Hope floating around out there?
Yeah.
That I heard about.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if that's going to show up at the celebration. That's that thing on the Star Wars show was saying like, oh, we're going to do a special tribute. So make sure you come to that because it's going to, and I think that's got to be, well, maybe that's just my thing. It's like maybe it's just somebody's going to come out on stage and wave. Maybe Harrison Ford's actually coming back for another round.
Yeah, or Lucas maybe. I mean
maybe.
that was my guess too, that they would bring Lucas back.
Oh, that might be true
for the panel to talk about,
which is completely shoots the whole idea that we're going to get the unaltered version for the 40th anniversary right in the blood.
Oh yeah,
because they'd be like, yeah. Well, I've always loved the movie before I changed it, so I kept saying to Disney, why don't you release my original vision of the film? It's like,
no, I mean that's
you're never gonna.
Even though it's owned by Disney now and it's Lucas is involved, the Lucasfilm kind of company line is the special editions. That is the official version of the movie. So yeah, I think to go back on that would be.
It would be a little weird.
At least at this point, at least so soon after the sale.
Although I would say that, and I don't know how the deal is, how it's structured, but as far as A New Hope goes or Star Wars, it's actually owned, I think, in perpetuity by Fox.
Yeah.
And so basically, that's why when you go to your digital copy of A New Hope, it'll actually still has the 20th Century Fox fanfare. And it doesn't connect to your Disney Everywhere account. So it's like, I bought it on iTunes, but it doesn't, I can connect my account. And so it's like, oh, I could watch it on Amazon or I can watch it on Xbox. Well, I only get 5 of the 6 movies because it's a separate deal with Fox for some reason.
Oh.
So I wonder, it's like, is Disney really going to come out and go, hey guys, we're releasing it in its unaltered thing? Well, Fox technically, unless they made some deal with Fox where they're like, hey, you can have the unaltered trilogy to release if we can own, A New Hope, we can buy that back from you, so we can kind of release them without having to do a deal with them. I don't even know how video deals work. But speaking of, I won't bore you guys with too much toy stuff because I know it's not really our focus on the show, but there was a toy fair in I forget where it was, New York Toy Fair maybe, this weekend, where Lucasfilm did kind of a lot of people in the collecting world have been kind of wondering, like, what are you going to do for the 40th anniversary? And basically the main thing is like they're going to have what is it? Force Friday. They're going to do another Force Friday for The Last Jedi, which I think people were pretty much sure that was going to happen, including the global unboxing, which, is fun. It's kind of like, everybody from...
I think, for people who are into that kind of thing, great.
Yeah. And the titanium figures, which I don't know much about those, but the thing that I'm more excited about, but then even so, I didn't rush out and buy them because they're now out of stock. They're doing they call it the original 12, which is the first 12 figures that were released by Kenner 40 years ago. What they're doing is they're going to do a re-release of all 12 figures over the next couple, from like April to May or over the whole year. With the original, with a kind of a version, a 40th anniversary card back, which is what, which the cards, what they attach the plastic bubble to. And it's the 6-inch black series of, Luke, Leia, Han, the droids, Chewbacca, Vader,
Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
I think there's a storm, just one.
A regular stormtrooper.
A New Hope stormtrooper.
A Jawa with a vinyl cape. So if people don't know this, originally, like for the first month, the Jawa was released with a with a plastic cape, and then they quickly switched it to a soft goods, like kind of a polyester material. And the vinyl ones are incredibly rare, and in the secondary markets are incredibly expensive to buy. It's usually the Holy Grail variant for collectors. I honestly don't even know how much they sell for right now. They're, but they're doing these, and they look good. They kind of did a pre-order. Hasbro did a pre-order that day, and I know a lot of collectors went and jumped on it, and some people already got them like next day. It was like, I think Hasbro was really kind of like wanting people to see, hey, this is a thing we're really pushing. And then they've got which if people know, back in the 70s, the movie was such a hit, and they didn't realize it. They were nowhere near ready to have the toys come out. They'd already made the deal for the toys. It wasn't like they decided to make the toys after it was a hit. They were coming out, but they thought, oh, we'll get it out. Well, it couldn't come out in time. The demand was so crazy that they created this thing, the early bird kit, which was basically, you got stands and a little certificate and these things, and then you got, I don't know if you got all 12 figures, but I never had one. But they're kind of doing something similar, or a recreation of this. And it's, like I said, I don't know how much of it is. I know that they're doing a new sculpt for the Darth Vader, which it's more of a New Hope, with the kind of the red lenses and the shoulders. The cloth goods are kind of done in a certain way. I mean, everything looks really great. The only thing with me personally as a collector, it's kind of like, oh boy, I don't want to buy them, because it's like my whole rule now is I'm buying these Black Series things for fun, and I'm taking them out of the package because I don't want to end up with a bunch of stuff that's just like, oh, here's the box of this thing. And these things are on the bubble, and I think you have to, I don't think it's a thing where you just cut a piece of tape and you can remove them from the packaging. I think you actually kind of have to destroy the packaging to get to them. I could be wrong. If anybody out there knows and happens to be listening to this, I tried to research this, and I kept trying to like zoom in. It's like, is this a thing where you can, like with the Gentle Giant, those figures where they actually do like 12-inch high reproductions of the original Kenner figures, you can actually take them out of the package and put them back in. It's kind of made to be taken out and displayed and then put back in. I don't know if these are the same. For me, that's kind of like, that's going to keep me from having any interest in actually buying them all. I'd probably get the Vader and the Stormtrooper and what.
I mean, it seems like these, above all, these are made to be collector's pieces, right? For people who collect. Like, it's not like, oh, we're making these new toys for the next generation. It's like, no, we're making these special kind of high-end 40th anniversary thing, to recapture that feeling from the 70s, and for the people who really want really nice collector's edition version of these figures.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, I listen to a lot of collecting Star Wars podcasts to kind of scratch my itch for that stuff, and there has been like there was some kind of not backlash, but there's a lot of grumbling that yes, this is really like the only thing that they made that for the 40th anniversary that is kind of geared towards the collector and the hardcore.
Well, we may hear about more later, but I gather this is kind of the big idea.
But I guess there's a whole contingent of collectors that they really want these 3 3/4 size figures to be, they kind of want people to keep improving those. But I think what happened is they have rented that license out to Walmart exclusively. So if you want the little articulate figure, you're only going to be able to get them at Walmart.
Yeah.
And generally, they're all going to be kind of like your standard Rogue One kind of thing. People are like, I don't have enough room to collect. Some people don't like the 6-inch. I like them because I'm not going to play with them. I just put them on my bookshelf and I look at them and enjoy them. And then it's like, they have enough detail where I feel like I don't have to jump into that realm where there's like, there's a place from Hong Kong called Hot Toys, and they make like these incredible, Star Wars things that, like I said, some people are like, they're okay with spending $200 on like a 12-inch super articulated thing. I'm never going to be that guy. I'm very picky because even this weekend I was out and I stumbled across an Orson Krennic 12-inch, and I'm like, I'm still not a huge fan of the way they make human faces for the Black Series. The paint jobs don't look good. So I stick to things like droids and armor. Even the C-3PO I looked at because that of all things is a Walgreens exclusive, which I had kind of said like, that's weird. But then somebody on another show had said like, there's this many thousands of Walgreens. There's actually more Walgreens than there are Targets. And if you were going to have if you wanted to get your toys in a store, that would be a great place. But again, it was like, 3PO's armor, it doesn't shine. It's got a matte finish. And I'm like, so I'm kind of, I'm actually excited about these rollouts because I think they're fun, but I'm probably going to pick and choose. I'm not going to go for a full set because one, I also missed the window for getting them until April or something like that. They said if you hadn't ordered them on Saturday, you weren't going to get them you weren't going to actually be able to get them till April. And I'm like, well, I can wait. I'd rather pick and choose. It's like, I'm still like, I don't want to pay, $35 each for a Baze and Chirrut Black Series. I'm just going to wait till April when they actually are supposed to be in the stores. It's, there is a kind of weird secondary market. Like I bought a Darth Revan that, just kind of thinking like, oh, this is cool. And then I keep going on eBay and like, oh my gosh, like one day it'll be worth 25. One day it'll be worth 65. And it's like, to me, that's not the fun part of it. I know maybe some people like that, but I just really, it's kind of like that thing where you're like, well, I don't know what I like until I see it. And and with these, it's like, until I actually hold the box, cause it's like, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable ordering this stuff from like retailers because sometimes you get one. It's like, oh wait, this guy doesn't even have an eyebrow. It's just like they can't go through. And I like to go to the store and kind of like pick through and make sure I'm getting one that, like, I was going to buy a Rey, like a year ago. And every time I'd pick one up, it'd be like, oh, what did they, her face looks weird on this one. Why did they paint it this way? And I went through like maybe a dozen and I never found one that I was like, I thought actually represented what you would go online and see what the catalog would look like. Not that they paint them special for the catalog, is just like it's like when they show a Big Mac, they pick the best Big Mac that they can get and they spray it full of, shellac or whatever to make it look its best. Yeah. Then take the photo and then you're like, hey, wait a second. Why don't they look like that? I think it's hard to do when they do these human faces that need more detail. But
yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. Yeah, I've been kind of disappointed just looking at the level of detail on the human faces. I mean, some of the Rey figures look awful to me. Like the way they, I guess, is it called the sculpt or the whatever the preferred term of art is on Rey's head and facial features for a lot of these figures. That just looks so bad to me. And so, yeah, I agree that they're not doing the best job with those. The other thing is, I think they have, a pretty clear strategy where they release kind of the initial, 3 3/4 figures, and they make a bunch of those, and those are kind of not great. And, they come with the, jetpacks and crazy lasers that then you get 4 particular figures together and you combine them and you make like a satellite dish or something, like they have all those things. But then they'll be like, oh, well, the Black Series, those will have, that's where you'll get the more detail, and so they're kind of, you know, trying to satisfy kind of two markets there.
Yeah, and I understand
with you know the kind of cheap, you know, the first batch or kind of the, you know, the non-Black Series figures that's like, yeah, whatever, parents, kids who don't really care about that stuff, you know, that's for them. And then the Black Series is like, oh, well, for the collectors who care about, you know, how many points of articulation the legs have, and the, you know, paint job on the armor and the sculpt of the head, you know, that's kind of who the Black Series are aimed for, which on the one hand, like, I get, and then on the other, I'm like, just put that effort. It just takes a little more effort on the 3 3/4, and it would be fine.
Have you seen the Saw Gerrera?
No, let me look that up.
So now it's not Black Series. It's a 3 3/4. It's called like Incident or something, Jedha Attack or Jedha Escape or something. So it's you get a 2 tubes, a Jin, a tank trooper, a Saw Gerrera. Yeah, like 4 figures in a pack. Yeah. And I actually think it's pretty. I like it. Maybe the 2 tubes I'd go for. I only want half the figures, but it's like they did a pretty good take on Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera that I kind of like, even though it's only a 3 3/4. I kind of wish they were doing it as a single, because that's the only one I truly want. And it's kind of like, oh, they did a pretty good job. It almost looks like a throwback to Kenner. It's, you know, it's one of the things where it's like, oh, you know, because he's kind of a large guy, and he's got the
Jedha Revolt 4-pack.
Jedha Revolt, that's it.
Yeah, this actually, yeah, you're right. This does look pretty good.
Yeah, they got
like the eyes are maybe, and the brow is maybe a little off, but it's fine enough, and
right. I mean,
the armor, you know, the body of it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, with Forrest Whitaker, I mean, he actually has, I guess the term is, and I apologize if this is the wrong term, like he has like a lazy eye or whatever.
Right.
I'm sure there's I wonder
went too far
when they're sculpting, it's like, well, how much do we emphasize this? We don't want to, you know, point it out, kind of thing, where it's like, well, you know, it's just that's his face, man. Don't pick on the guy. But yeah, I know it's kind of a balance between the two. It seems a little like he seems a little bit sleepy on it, but you know, it's pretty good for 3 3/4. But like what you were saying about these kind of issues, where it's like, I think like what people tell me, and I have that same issue, but now that I'm hanging out with these toy people, and I ask them a lot of questions, because I'm like, who's going to know more than people that actually spend a lot of money on this and spend a lot of time on it? And they always say it's always the paint job that you're kind of going, ugh. You know, sometimes, I mean, there's a YouTube guy that English fella, and he goes, the name of his channel is Toy Polloi, like Hoi Polloi. And he kind of does reviews of toys, and and I was one of the things I picked up on that Rogue Friday or whatever was a Stormtrooper, because I thought, oh, it's so great. It looks so great. It looks like a throwback. And then he did a review of it and pointed out how they kind of goofed up the sculpt and made the chest of the guy like way too small, because they wanted to be able to fit on this like explosive battle armor. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at it, the chest is actually smaller than the original Kenner figure. And then I'm like, now I can't unsee that. And it's like, oh, this is kind of sucks, man. This doesn't actually look as good as I thought. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, now it's in some ways, I'm learning to become more discriminating when it comes to these things. At first, I'm like, oh yeah, it looks fine to me. But then like, no, if you really look at it, it's not. And you're like, I don't know at the end of the day if maybe that's a bad thing. I'm like, maybe having too much knowledge isn't so great. Maybe I should keep in the dark with these things. But it's fun to kind of see, like, you know, they have the constant balance between trying to please people that, you know, collect this as a hobby, and the idea that, you know, regardless of what you say, these are toys for kids. And at some point you got to think about, what is a 4 or 5 year old in 2017, what are the things that is going to, you know, replayability, collectability, and I don't mean not in the mint in box form, but in the idea like, I got to have them all, Mom. I want this for my birthday, and I want this for Christmas. But, you know, now that we've got movies, you know, boom, 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 one right after the other, which I guess is a way we can dovetail into this, into the Han Solo talk and away from toys, which kind of makes me realize, like, oh wow, we've got a thing going on now, because they've obviously, if you haven't seen, they've released the first cast it's not even a full cast photo.
Not even full cast. Everyone who's there on the first day of shooting, I guess.
Right, and they're in their street clothes, so it's not, to me, it's not as exciting as when they, in some ways, it's not as exciting as the release, obviously, as the table read photo, and it's definitely not as kind of intriguing as the Rogue One cast photo, which I still consider like one of the best. I still love that photo, even after the,
where they're in costume and they're on set.
Yeah, it's just so cool. But yeah, this photo, it's Woody Harrelson, it's Donald Glover, it's
Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
Yeah, it's the whole guy.
Amelia Clark, and the lady playing the CG character.
Yeah, the Fleabag lady and then I guess Tandy Newton.
I guess it's confirmed that she's going to be in the movie.
Yeah, she said something like,
Tandy Newton is in the movie, but not present for the photo.
And the other big reveal was, what's his name? Who's the Finnish basketball player?
It's like Juno something.
Yeah, he just tweeted. I feel bad because we just followed him on Twitter.
Maybe it's Juno.
Anyway, let me just read it because I should give the guy his due. His name. Oh, come on now. Why? Jonas Suotamo, which I don't know how to. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but so. I guess the worst kept secret ever that he will be playing Chewbacca in the Han Solo movie, which
he did some stints in the suit for The Force Awakens as well,
and I assume he was playing Chewbacca in the Last Jedi as well. Which I mean, yeah, I don't know how much Chewbacca,
or at least whenever Chewie has to get up and run around and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I understand they're probably trying to do it in a way so they didn't want to, since the whole marketing of The Force Awakens was, hey, it's your old friends for one more ride kind of situation. Yeah. They probably didn't want to overemphasize that technically Peter was rarely in the suit when he was standing.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of it. So it's official. And also the one thing the one thing that I found the most fascinating was the fact that they are still on target for the May 25th, 2018, which is like, that means that between The Last Jedi and the Han Solo movie is 5 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is, yeah.
That's kind of amazing.
It's not a lot. I mean, especially when you consider... Right, what we were just talking about, the Blu-ray release of Rogue One isn't going to come out till beginning of April. So if they keep to that same schedule of The Last Jedi, we're going to have basically a month and a half between when the Blu-ray release of Last Jedi comes out and then the Han Solo movie hits theaters. Yeah. So that's really not. I mean. I guess maybe that helps them advertise, right? They can put, here's the cast of the Star Wars, of the new Han Solo movie to tell you to, buy the Blu-ray, or here's the cast of Rogue One, or of The Last Jedi to tell you to go see the Han Solo movie. I don't know.
It's what's so fascinating. It's like how, people always go, oh, when you get older, time seems to speed up. But I mean, it's literally we've gone from 3 years, the idea where it's like, I went from one movie came out, I was 7, and then the next one comes out and I'm 10, which, is a huge jump, at least when you're that age, to now it's like, oh, I'm going to be like, oh, I really need to call somebody to come and clean my roof kind of thing. And I'm going to be able to put that off in my mind. And between that time, another Star Wars movie will come out. I mean, being a procrastinator, it's like that thing where it's like, oh man, that's not a lot of time. I've put off tasks twice as long as the distance between Star Wars movies now. But of course, that's also going to mean that there will be an 18-month gap. I assume an 18-month gap between the last between the Han Solo movie and then whatever the ninth Star Wars film,
Episode 9,
which may create a kind of a weird thing where it's like they're gonna, have this huge glut of stuff, and then it's gonna feel like a total famine of stuff, even though it's 18 months, which is nothing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, when you talk about having the glut of stuff, it's not just going from one Star Wars movie to the next, right? So Disney is also in charge of the Marvel movies. Avengers: Infinity War Part 1 is still has a March 4th, 2008 release date. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp has a July 6th, 2018 release date, which I could see them saying, okay, Ant-Man and the Wasp, that'll be kind of like a smaller thing. We're not going to hype that up as much, because Ant-Man was kind of a smaller deal. But Avengers Infinity, to put out the next Avengers movie and then have a Star Wars movie come out 3 weeks after that. I mean, they're based, this was bound to happen eventually, where there's going to be this question of how much are they cannibalizing themselves, and sure, people can go see both on different weeks, but they're only giving Avengers 3 weeks basically where they will want it to top the box office before they will expect it to make room for Star Wars. And so it's an interesting, it's a way to go, I guess. And I know I sound too much like I work for Variety, or, well, maybe not Variety, but I work for some of these like film blogs when I talk about it in these terms. But I mean, the fact that it's the same company, and they're basically, I don't know what that says about their expectations for either of these movies, that they're really only giving the next Avengers movies 3 weeks in the theaters before the next big Star Wars movie comes out.
Yeah, that is interesting. It makes me kind of like, maybe that's like that they realize that these are like long-term investments, that they make a ton of money up the upfront, but it's literally, I mean, Rogue One was only the number one film for, maybe, was it 2 or 3 weeks?
I feel like it was probably 3.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like that maybe now they realize that once the further you go down the brand, it's like it's almost impossible,
right,
to do that. But I mean, Fox is really hoping. I think they're really heavily leveraging that this Logan movie that comes out in a week and a half is going to be, which is kind of interesting, because we're talking at this point, we are 5, 7. This is like the 8th kind of Wolverine-ish or 9th Wolverine-ish movie, where it's like, I mean, he's appeared in every one of those X-Men movies, even if it's only a brief cameo. So I almost feel like they're all, in some ways, they've relied on Wolverine, that character, and this is kind of like the last run for him. Right.
This is the send-off for that character, I think.
Because, yeah, definitely people's enthusiasm for X-Men movies has dwindled incredibly and very quickly, because, those movies weren't very good. Well, it's and I don't know if it's appropriate because these aren't Disney productions, but they're Fox. But I mean, look at, Days of Future Past, which I think a lot of people, at least when I went and saw it, I enjoyed it. I don't go to the theater that one, but I did make an effort to go out and see that one, and I'd say overall it's like, yeah, it was pretty good. But then like they turned around with the Age of Apocalypse or whatever. I actually forget the name of the thing. It was so bad. I
think it was just Apocalypse.
It was just so bad. It was like it was almost like Bryan Singer had kind of forgotten everything he'd learned in all the years of making superhero movies, and it was like, but the reason I bring it up is like, it's kind of interesting because eventually there's going to be a Star Wars movie that's gonna fail. I mean, that's my own personal take, that it's like, they're doing a great job, but there's just creating art that's mixed with commerce. Eventually the ingredients are not going to congeal properly, and your souffle is going to collapse or whatever. And I just, and I think I've said it a lot that, it's going to be the Han Solo movie. It's going to be the Han Solo movie. Let me look at, they've got, they're casting guys that kind of don't have a time honored a track record of doing movies like this. Like Gareth Edwards, you could say, well, Godzilla is a big, and these guys did the Lego movie in 22 Jump Street, and they do television, episodic television, but whatever. I mean, Rian Johnson has a much more, you could see a through line to his previous work to Star Wars. But the truth is, The Last Jedi could stink. I mean, just people have too much, there's too much inertia, the idea that, Rian Johnson is a great director, which I would say he is. But like these things can, can come out and just not work. It's just that idea, like, right. I mean, I've actually started thinking about this myself because I feel like I've been, kind of hard on the Han Solo movie because it's like, well, they have a lot of things stacked against it. It's, beloved characters, major recasting. Again, they're dipping back into a timeline that, has been feels like it's been mined pretty well. And it's also a opportunity for a way too much nostalgia and way too many, like, again, blue milk shots or, that kind of things, but then again, this whole idea of like the Last Jedi coming off of the massive success of The Force Awakens, just because Empire was such a great sequel to thing doesn't mean that The Last Jedi is going to be
right.
And
that I mean, look at Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, people thought, Attack of the Clones is going to fix all the problems that the thing, and in a lot of ways they exacerbated some of the issues.
Yeah.
Not that the Force Awakens is left the franchise at a deficit. I just feel like it's that maybe it's just my negative outlook on life. It's just like sometimes it's that I think like eventually somebody's gonna they're gonna pull a real boner with one of these movies, which in some ways I don't actually consider the Phantom Menace to be that. Because it's still because I still hear people that's younger people or kids that grew up with it saying how much they enjoyed that movie when they were kids. So I feel like because maybe it didn't speak to me, it was successful for them. Now, that being said, you could say 20 years from now, hey, The Last Jedi or whatever, but we haven't seen anything, so I'm obviously in full speculation mode. But it that little things like, I don't know. We haven't heard anything about it. Now, I know that's because they're being so coy, and we're literally, what month is this? Are we in the second month? We're, 10 months away from it. Mm-hmm. Almost exactly. Yeah.
So we've heard one thing, but before I get to that, I mean, the flip side of the having Han Solo movie come out in May, 3 weeks after Avengers Infinity War Part 1, Avatar 2 comes out December 2018. And I don't know that this is necessarily Lucasfilm scared that Avatar 2 will outperform Star Wars and they don't want to invite the comparison, but I do wonder if it speaks to they're not really sure what to expect from Avatar 2.
Right. Now when is Avatar 2? I'm sorry. When is Avatar 2?
It's December 21st. It's
of 2018.
Yep.
Wow. I didn't even know that was filming.
We're getting there. Avatar, yeah. And then December 25th, there's Untitled Warner Brothers event film, Christmas 2018, but who knows what that's going to be. That could be nothing. But yeah, Avatar 2, December 21st. So, it could be that they just, they don't want to invite the comparison, or they're just not really sure whether the reaction is going to be the same to Avatar 2 as it was to the first Avatar. I mean, there's part of me that's like, come on, have a little more confidence in your product. But we are talking about, but we're not talking about episode 8 or episode 9. We're talking about a standalone Han Solo film that, from what we hear, is going to be very different. It is going to be more of that kind of let's use this format to experiment. Very much that idea. And so it could be that they don't want to handicap themselves. If this was episode 9 or episode 8, then maybe they're confident that it'll do well. But it could be that they also, it's a way of encouraging Phil Lord and Chris Miller Yeah. Okay. Sorry. For a second, I was worried I had.
I know. I have that issue with their names too.
Just saying like, look, we're confident that you'll do well. We're gonna put you and your movie in a position to do well. We're not going to expect you to go up against Avatar 2. Just and in doing so, put expectations for what your Star Wars movie is supposed to be and do. Instead, we'll put it out in May and let you make whatever Star Wars movie you want to make, and don't worry about having to compete with Avatar. I that could be more of what it is, but I mean, there is that aspect to these scheduling decisions.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, and in May is not like the graveyard. It's not like January, which is the graveyard. Like basically any movie that comes out in January is basically a studio said, we created this movie. It's too expensive. It's going to underperform. We need to put something out. Let's put it out in January. But I can kind of understand. It's like in some ways, Avatar 2 and Han Solo could occupy it, at least in viewer interest. Like the idea, it's like I've heard people say that in some ways the Han Solo movie is the Star Wars movie nobody asked for, and Avatar 2 is definitely the sequel to a movie. It's the sequel that nobody asked for, because like the joke,
and we're getting even more of them.
Yeah, it's like people are like,
5.
When I finished Avatar, the first thing out of my mind was not like, ooh, what happens next? It was like, okay, well that was interesting. It's not like a situation where they go, And that's the thing. Like people say, Han Solo's not, when he died, I didn't think to myself, boy, I hope they show him when he's 25, because I really want to know how he got that ship. And then it's like, well, we all kind of know how he got the ship. Now, I don't want to pick on the Han Solo movie, because now that it's been cast, and I'm just as excited as anybody else, but like I said, cautiously excited. And you're right. I think that, May is a kind of in some ways you're like, yeah, why don't you have some confidence and just go, hey, Christmas belongs to Star Wars now. And we, it'll be that kind of thing. But again, May is not a bad time. And in some ways, the only reason Star Wars ended up at Christmas is because there was an issue with, some issues with JJ was putting the movie together, and they realized they couldn't get it out in May, and Bob Iger gave him an extra 6 months or whatever. Is that how?
I think that was.
Or was that was it timed to? It wasn't timed to Harrison Ford's injury, was it? I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure that it helped with Harrison Ford's injury, but I don't think that was the reason.
I just think it's it's so funny though. After all these years, they realized that there's only 2 times of the year that movies this big can be released.
Right. Don't do it in March.
Don't do
it in October.
Right. It's kind of like they know that people won't go. They won't. Not enough people will go and see a movie that time of year or something. But
right. Well, you need people to have free time. You need kids to be off from school.
That is true.
All that good stuff. But you mentioned that we haven't really heard much about The Last Jedi. We have heard one thing in the last week, which is that John Williams is scoring the movie, and I think should be finishing scoring the movie soon. Scoring in terms of actually recording the score, I mean. Because director Rian Johnson wants to edit the movie to John Williams' score. So rather than use a temp track to do like kind of I mean, he may have a rough cut of the movie already, but rather than, have a rough cut and then, where he puts in other music and then shows it to John Williams is like, make it sound a little bit like Stravinsky. He wants to actually edit the film to John Williams's score. Now, I don't really know whether that will make a difference. In part because we won't have the counterfactual, right? We won't be able to see the movie that he edited without John Williams' score versus the one he edited with John Williams' score. But also, it could be that, there will be some scenes that maybe extend a few more seconds or end a few seconds earlier based on the cues that John Williams has been writing, based on, the script and some of the daily, so the edits, the scene transitions maybe tied more to what John Williams does than vice versa. Which I mean, that right in theory, it sounds like, oh, that could be really interesting. It also could just end up having very little perceptible effect. But I think it. I mean, part of me wonders, like, all right, is this just because they're not sure about John Williams' health and whether he'll be able to record later in the year, and they want to do it now while he has time, or maybe this worked for his schedule because he has another Spielberg movie lined up for later in the year, and this is when he could work it in. Who knows how much of that is part of the story that we're not being told. But I mean, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, some of your takes. I mean, I agree. It's like, yeah, is it an accommodation kind of situation where, not necessarily health, because I haven't heard. Well, no, I heard he had been ill at some point recently.
Yeah,
but yeah, mostly it's a kind of thing where they don't want to waste the guy's time. Which that's the old thing that kind of happened in the '90s and the aughts, is that John Williams would have to come back, and then George would change, like, oh, I added 20 minutes to the movie of a droid factory or something. Come back and score that. And then, like, we cut half of your music out, but we can't reuse it because it's not the right tone. So it's like, yeah, that kind of idea that, that he had to kind of come back, and he was a whole part of the reshoot process, I guess is what I'm saying, which was written into the production. Well, now they're like, he's not as accommodating either for time or even health. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, they're basically close that workflow, keep that workflow concise. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, why don't you come back out in 6 months and we'll do a final pass on it, and you can add the bits and pieces. They just they don't know. He might just say no. It's like he's he had a career before Star Wars and had a career after. It's not like a thing where he loves. I assume he still loves doing them. He's at least found a way to be engaged with the fact that he seems to have a special affinity for Daisy Ridley's Rey and whatnot. So I think it's Lucasfilm's way of like creating a workflow, making it as easy as possible for John Williams to just say, I'm going to come in, I'm going to compose, Rian Johnson's going to, edit to the score, which I don't think has ever been done in a Star Wars movie.
Right.
We all know Michael Giacchino didn't get to have any of those kind of benefits.
Right.
He had to run in and be like, all right, how do I do this? I don't piss off the nerds, and I put my own personal stamp on it. I've got 28 days. Go. Mm-hmm. So I think something like this feels like a concession to a maestro's schedule, and maybe I don't know what he's like interpersonally. I hear he's everything I've ever seen is that he's an easygoing professional. Like it's about the music. So in some ways,
right. I mean, it seems like if if you're on friendly terms with him, he's like the nicest man in the world,
right?
And maybe even if you're not, but he clearly he'll get annoyed about stuff if let's say you cut out a lot of his music for no reason. But
this kind of stuff will bring him.
He's willing to work with them at Lucasfilm, and I think too he's talked about this and other people at Lucasfilm, and the effects folks and on the media side, everyone like talks about it as this kind of community of people who get together to put Star Wars together. And you can say like, well, that's just, I'm sure it feels like that to them, but, on the outside, it looks like a very large media conglomerate, But on the other hand, right, like I think they do at least want to foster that feeling among their employees, or contractors, as you would more accurately call John Williams, right? And so they maybe want to extend some of those courtesies to him to keep him feeling like, hey, you're part of this community and you are one of the most important parts of this community. We want to make sure that you are well taken care of in this process and that we don't, we're you're not gonna treat John Williams the way you treat Michael Giacchino, right? Not that
exactly.
not that they like intentionally like went out of their way to be short with Michael Giacchino or anything like that, but like you're gonna give John Williams a little more deference than you will,
right? You know,
someone that you just hired to score one of the standalone movies.
And it behooves them to do it because as simple as they make it, then it makes when they need him to come back in to do, if you know, hopefully he could do episode 9, which I think would be wonderful if you can have a consistent, you know, 9 movies all scored by the same man, because we all know it's like Dave Collins says, it's the oxygen of Star Wars on the Star Wars Oxygen podcast. It is an important thing, and I don't think any fan, you know, this is no, you know, I defended Michael Giacchino a whole bunch. That's no dig on anybody else, but as long as we
and
can
I didn't
keep
mean to make it sound
no, and I didn't think you did, but I mean, my point is that we want to keep. If like, hey, if it's working, let's keep it going, and if we can, you know, like. I think the best example, which might seem a little bit silly, but like how many years did you know, NBC, Lorne Michaels, go out of their way to make sure that Don Pardo was there to do the announcement, which you'd think to yourself, like, okay, what does it matter? But really, on some level, for the overall holistic approach to, you know, Saturday Night Live or whatever its history, at least Lorne Michaels thought to himself, it was enough for him to pay to fly Don Pardo out first class on Saturday, do a 30-second voice bit and fly him back, you know, and he did that till, you know, his health just couldn't do it. And and I feel like as long as, you know, when we have these, you know, senior masters, you know, like John Williams, who's 85, I don't think there's anything wrong with making concessions to your you know, your physical humanity of your energy level and how much BS you're going to put up with. And I think in some ways it's a good thing that Disney is kind of, you know, they are accommodating, you know, participants of a certain age, you know what I mean? I don't think it's a bad thing that like you would go out of your way to say, hey, he's 85. He's not going to be able to come shoot in and do a 2-day thing because blah, blah, blah. Maybe he doesn't like to fly. I think that's one of the big things. He doesn't like to fly anymore. But I mean, as long as that's what you got to do. I mean, it would be great if they could do that for everybody. But obviously things like Peter Mayhew's knees, even after he had him replaced, he's still not as mobile as he used to be. And so he can't do Chewbacca the way he did. So maybe they said, well, they did a final run on him on The Force Awakens, and then, you know, he's been replaced. Again, like I said, I haven't heard anything. Peter Mayhew hasn't said one way or the other, but yeah, I think this is a good thing. And then, like I say, it's a way to extend a guy's, like I say, there's nothing wrong with conceding to an aged maestro, you know, to be able to make him a part of these as long as possible. And if he could make it to all the way through 9, I would be pleased as punch.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Same here. And you know, I think he, you know, again, the affinity he has for the Rey character, right? He has some kind of proprietary feeling over, you know, writing the music of Star Wars himself. Yeah. So I mean, that's, you know, I think that's something. I don't think that's something that like everyone is wishing and he's indifferent to, right? I think he wants to see it through at least to the end of the 9th movie.
Well, yeah, and it's heartening to think that he is still emotionally engaged in these things. And I mean, sometimes you wonder, it's like, you know, not to speak ill of the dead, but you know, the composer James Horner, he famously was the guy that would constantly plagiarize himself, and all of his scores kind of sounded the same. And I get this feeling that like he used to sweep into a place with his, you know, with a, you know, big scarf and sunglasses, and pull out a stick and go, all right, here's my, you know, they'd probably go through it once and they'd record it and throw out, you know. I don't feel like he had a lot of emotional connection to the films that he was making. So, you know, a guy like John Williams, if you can find someone like that.
Right.
And again, it's like, even if for some reason he either through health or his own just disinterest in doing 9, it's like I said, Giacchino's still around. You know, he's willing to work, but I would prefer it to be John Williams.
Yeah, exactly.
What do we want to talk about
So
next?
with that, I mentioned it earlier, but Aftermath: Empire's End, the third and final book of the Star Wars Aftermath trilogy of Star Wars novels, was released this week. I guess we're getting little bits and pieces of what's in the book coming out, and other people will have reviews up this week and early next week. I haven't read it yet. I don't think you are going to read it at all.
I have no plan.
My review will come after I finish reading Blade of Heaven and then read through Empire's End. So two new things that we discovered this week that aren't really heavy spoilers, so we feel okay talking about here. First is that we have learned the fate of Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar's noble end, not his death, but basically what happened to him after the events of the prequels. And then Lumpy, though he's now referred to as Waru.
It's not Lump Waru or whatever?
Yeah, well, his full name is Lumpa Waru.
Okay.
And then I think so this is Chewbacca's son from the Star Wars Christmas special, the infamous Star Wars Christmas special. And I think, he was either called Lumpy in the special, or everyone just started calling him Lumpy because of Chewbacca, who's Chewie, and then you had Lumpy, and then you had Itchy, who was the grandfather, I guess. But
and then
so
Mala, his
in
wife.
This book, right in the book, the character has been brought into the new canon. This time, his official canon nickname or shortened version of his name is Waru. So he's now Waru. He's no longer Lumpy. But so he is. They have reached out to the Christmas special and are bringing the Christmas special into canon, which again we can only hope that B. Arthur will make an appearance sometime in the future. So Jar Jar, I alluded to his fate. Do I have this right? He ended up like as a dancer somewhere.
Well, he's basically like a panhandler,
right? Yeah,
and I don't know.
Right. He's one of those folks who like does an old soft shoe on the street corner for dimes or whatever.
Yeah,
that would be the analogy.
Well, we had
someone. He had been a member of the, I guess, Imperial House of Representatives or whatever. He wasn't a senator, but he was like a representative. Binks. Right. So someone tweeted at Pablo Hidalgo last week about like, well, come on, how realistic is that someone, you take this character who was a politician and then, his fate is that he ends up, just dancing for money. To which Pablo Hidalgo replied with a photo of former Texas Governor Rick Perry on Dancing with the Stars. So, this, on the one hand, this seems like Chuck Wendig being like, yeah, I don't like that character, and I'm going to make sure he ends up in the gutter. On the other hand, you could potentially draw parallels to contemporary American life. And so you could say like, well, maybe this is just the Star Wars version of that. Which makes it maybe a little better, maybe not, depending on your view of both the Dancing with the Stars program and both former Texas Governor Rick Perry and former Texas Representative Tom DeLay, who have both been on that show. Regardless, that is Jar Jar's noble, ignoble, and at least according to Chuck Wendig, Aftermath: Empire's End. So you have very distinct feelings about at least the Jar Jar news.
Yeah.
I mean, and it kind of ties to what I was saying. That in some ways, this is, it's kind of like, all right, we know that Jar Jar isn't everyone's favorite character. We thought that like Lucasfilm was, behind the character and, justified the character, everything like that. They put him in Clone Wars and gave him a big role. And now they're like, well, if one of our people wants to trash him, fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with this. It's like, I feel like, I kept on trying to think about the right word because I don't really want to be like, I'm not like outraged. I'm not like because to be perfectly honest, how do I deal with something that I don't like? I don't buy the book. So I'm not buying the book. I'm not reading the book. So people listening, obviously grain of salt, maybe. I tried to find an excerpt, but basically everything I've seen is just a breakdown of where Jar Jar Binks is. I mean, I feel like that is it's kind of petty in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not Chuck Wendig's take on it. And I'm not trying to impugn on Chuck Wendig or anything like that. I don't know what his intentions are, so I'm just going to speak how I interpret it.
Your perception.
My perception.
One fan is probably actually two fans' perception of how this looks.
Well, I mean, I'm not a huge Jar Jar Binks fan. I didn't walk out of the Phantom Menace going, boy, I tell you, that lightsaber thing was cool, but Jar Jar Binks. I mean, I watched the Phantom Menace last night again to kind of get prepared, and I watched it with the sound off, which, if you could come out with an edit of that movie, which was just score with no dialogue, it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing film. But it just feels like that's poor stewardship of Star Wars in the sense that, George obviously is not connected to Lucasfilm anymore, but he's still out there, and these are his creations. And when, he took the note, no matter what people say, like, oh, he doesn't seem to get it. He doesn't seem to get it. We hate Jar Jar. He got the note, but he couldn't just go, hey, I'm going to he's just going to disappear from the movie. He wanted to, he obviously had some plan, or he had kids that said, I love Jar Jar. And he didn't want to just have him be nowhere. And then people go, whatever happened to Jar Jar? So he did appear briefly in, very, very briefly in Revenge of the Sith. And he had a couple short sequences in Attack of the Clones. Now I feel like, okay, well, the last time we see him, I guess, is when during the funeral for Padme. Although some people have said
chronologically within the universe.
Yeah, some people say at the end of Return of the Jedi, the added Naboo scene, that he's one of the Gungans celebrating in Theed. Who's to say? They don't say it explicitly, but it's just this idea where it's like, well, okay, we all know that that's a soft spot in the litany of Star Wars. But I feel like, does it really help things to just kind of just make this, character, this maligned character, into a beggar on the street that doesn't, in basically the way it's depicted, that he doesn't seem to understand why he is. So he's he's not mentally coherent enough to even understand that people feel that he had a foot in, universal events or whatever in the galaxy. It just feels like this kind of snotty, kind of thing at the prequels. And it's like, well, dude, that's great if you're writing a one-off comic for something, or you're doing a skit on your podcast, or you have a t-shirt, or you're making a fan film, or, stuff. But when you're making, supposedly now we're supposed to take all of these things as canon. So, it's all one unified canon. All the comic books are supposed to connect to the books, and the movies are supposed to, the saga movies connect to the spin-off movies, and the cartoons are connected to, this. So you have this holistic Star Wars. Yeah. This holistic Star Wars approach. And then you kind of just, right out of the bat, you kind of take one of, something that George created, which he thought was going to be this, finally I've got something for little kids. And maybe his own kids. He had very young children when he made these movies. Yep. In some respects, he might have made, and then just to kind of go, yeah, he's begging for change. And it's just to me, it feels like, why, how much do you really understand the whole approach to Star Wars if you would do that? I think it'd be better just to leave it, not even speak on it. It's these interludes. And also, my own feelings about this series of books, not being a fan of them, having, read one, tried to read another and just gave up. And, so maybe it's a reflection on that. I don't think that these books have the necessary gravitas to be on the level of like, this is how I want these things to be explained. I'd much rather, had them. I think, and I went through last week kind of my take on it, and I feel like I'm maybe picking on Chuck Wendig, which I don't know the guy, and I'm not. It's not really an indictment of him, but it's just like, maybe it's an indictment of the thought process. It's just the thing, like, why do you need to thumb your, and I know that JJ even made a joke, like he wanted to have,
the skeleton of Jar Jar Binks on the desert of Jakku.
And I think I complained about that too. And it's like, yeah, okay. And JJ Abrams doesn't like Ewoks. So it's like, well, guess what? Star Wars isn't just about the guy who's holding the page or the script or whatever. It's about an approach. And if you don't have anything truly interesting to say, now maybe he would make the argument like, well, kind of showing how this happens is my take on it. I don't know. I feel like some of that stuff is like, maybe it's gratuitous. It's gratuitous.
It is.
And but I don't put it squarely on Wendig, because if we're hearing like, Pablo Hidalgo's kind of defending it and then using a real life example of a politician who's, I don't want to get into politics, but he's like he actually is part of the current administration.
No, he is. That's right.
He's energy secretary, and
I should say our current energy secretary. Has he been confirmed yet?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not watching much news these days. But my point is that it's not going to age well. It's not going to age well if we have little tiny like things like, well, it ties into the whole zeitgeist of what's going on in the world right now. And like I'm a fervent defender of the idea that Star Wars should always try to exist outside the realm of what's going on in the world now, because I think it should be a refuge for anyone who just wants to enjoy a great story well told and not reflect on the problems that we all have as human beings in this world. You know what I mean? Right. And when you tie it to something and then you kind of give evidence that you are trying to point out that, okay, this is what happens. This is what happens to people that support dictators, or you know what I mean? It's that kind of idea where it's part of me is like thinking like, is that what he's trying to say? Is this a admonishment? Is this a warning? Or am I being too sensitive? Because I'm too sensitive in the sense that I really feel like, why and you had pointed out in the prequels that there was things like, little jokes about Trent Lott with Lott Dodd, and there was other, people had made comments like I think Rush Limbaugh went off the deep end about something about that he thought that there was things in Revenge of the Sith that were pointed towards the administration and we can debate those forever, and that's fine, but my personal feeling is that why dip into those things? Because all you're doing is you're going to age your movie. You're going to age your book. You're trying to create, this is fantasy. It's supposed to be fun. Why I think, and now I could be completely misinterpreting that. And he was just like, maybe he thought that he was giving gravitas to Jar Jar Binks in this kind of Pagliacci ending where it's like, oh, he's the sad clown and he doesn't realize
the tragedy of
like the tragedy. So I will concede this could be my interpretation, but this is the problem that I feel like if I'm starting to get a feeling that like, we're going to get little, whenever somebody in the readers, the writers group or whatever has a bone to pick, or a point they want to put across about what's going on in the real world, when that starts to show up in ancillary material, then it's kind of a red flag for me of being like, well, you're taking me out of the story. I'm not saying like, keep your personal politics at, but that's what Twitter is for. Obviously nobody at Lucasfilm has any problem speaking on their personal beliefs, and I feel that is perfectly fine. This is a free country, and even then, it's like if they want to do it, maybe they just thought they were being subtle, and maybe I didn't. Maybe it wasn't subtle enough, or whatever. It's not. I'm not admonishing people. I'm just saying when this kind of stuff happens, this is when all of a sudden I feel like, oh, thanks for making me think about that. whether or not, whatever I think about it. And I'm not dictating that people need to feel a certain way about anything. I'm just saying, there's so many things in our life that have become intertwined with, politics and social stuff. It's, obviously times are going to change in fiction is always going to reflect that, even if it's fantasy fiction. I totally understand that, because attitudes change, old mistakes, things that we consider mistakes now are slowly changed, and that's fine. But when you specifically are kind of going like, well, we're kind of talking about this, and they're pointing to something, then I just kind of go, oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I said earlier, I think it's just gratuitous, and in the sense that no one was asking what happened to Jar Jar Binks, right? I think even his most ardent fans among Star Warsdom, no one was clamoring like, oh, I need to find out what happens to Jar Jar Binks, after the events of Return of the Jedi. Like, I just don't think that was really anything to consider. I mean, my preference would have just been to like, don't even bother with that character, right? Not because of my own personal dislike of that character, but it just is not something that needed to be happening. No one was like, oh, I can't wait until they check in with what Jar Jar Binks is doing. What's Boss Nass up to these days?
Exactly.
Is Dex's Diner still open?
I know.
Like, those are
There's
questions,
so
like,
many things they could have gone back to.
Well, again, it's like, and it's fine if you like those things, but like they're just not. It just doesn't seem like they're relevant to telling the story of what the galaxy was like post Return of the Jedi. So I mean, I kind of wonder, like, sitting here listening to you, like, part of me was wondering, like, is this to shut down all of the like Jar Jar Binks' Snoke stuff? Like, because it just doesn't. Why? Like, there's no reason for them to do this. There's no reason for them to like provide closure to the Jar Jar Binks story, or at least, the 30 years later chapter or not 30 years, but the 20 years later chapter of the Jar Jar Binks story. Unless they were like annoyed that like all these people think, have this theory that he's Snoke. Yeah, ha ha ha, but we're going to shut that down and be like, nope, this is what happened to Snoke. To Jar Jar Binks. He's not Snoke. Right? And we know that because this is where he is at this point in his life. I don't think that's really what it is, but it's just, there's no reason to do it. There's no, right. I'm sure they told Chuck Wendig that, with these vignettes, he can kind of do what he wants, more or less. But it just seems gratuitous and unnecessary, and it's like, just why you didn't have to go back to that. Like, there's no real, I mean, unless something's coming down the pike that this is preparing us for, that we don't even know, man. Who asked for this?
Well, yeah,
that's kind of what it comes down to for me.
In a fictitious science fantasy galaxy that spans 40 years, in which we find a man who, murders an entire village of sand people, murders his entire religious order, murders children, basically leads to the death of his own wife through her own heartbreak, however you take that weirdness, tortures his own daughter, maims, thing. So even a guy like that, like, basically, pardon my French, the asshole of the universe, can be redeemed and become a Force ghost, and Jar Jar Binks gets quarters thrown at him. It's that kind of, he's abjectly an object of scorn and thing because he one time got tricked by a very crafty Sith Lord politician. It seems a little out of whack, Yeah. It's that kind of like, oh, is that what you're saying? Some people are beyond redemption and it's only because he made one mistake. It's kind of like, that's not really in the tone of the Star Wars that I know, but whatever. You could argue that point
Agreed.
all day.
Yeah. Well, so if that book doesn't tickle your fancy, good news, because there's a new book in the works that they announced. I have no idea if it is written yet or if they just have signed the contract and that's it. But it's going to be called Inferno Squad. I initially thought it was called Infernal Squad. It's Inferno.
That Inferno Squad's coming!
Yeah. It takes place pretty much immediately after the events of Rogue One. Follows an elite Imperial squadron trying to break up the remnants of Saw Gerrera's, group of partisans, which, well, I'll get to that in a second. But it's going to be written by Christy Golden, who wrote Dark Disciple, the Asajj Ventress Quinlan Voss novel based on some Clone Wars scripts, which I'll also talk about in a second. I can't remember if they set a release date for when this book was coming out, but they just said it's coming. So, I mean, how do you feel about this? This is most of the books. I guess. What was it? There was Twilight Company had a character in there who was a stormtrooper, and so you got a little bit of stormtrooper dialogue, a day in the life there out on some distant outpost. They were on Sullust, but this is kind of, and then we've gotten Tarkin and Vader novels, but I think this is the first newish look at kind of that mid-level where they're not, they're an elite squadron, but they don't really have any decision-making power. Group of, I don't know if they're stormtroopers or death troopers or whatever they're going to be. So what do you think about this?
I'm actually kind of intrigued, believe it or not. I liked, did you ever read any of the, Karen Travis's books?
Yep.
I enjoyed those. I know that she
they were very good.
She had interactions with Lucasfilm that basically made her decide not to continue with the series. But she was very good at that military. I'm not a huge military sci-fi fan, but I enjoyed her books. Mm-hmm. And if Christy Golden kind of, I haven't read any of her Star Wars work yet, but she's done at least 4 or 5 books. And and one of the things,
I think she did 3 of the new Jedi Order or new Jedi Academy books, and then she did the Dark Disciple. But she's also written a fair amount of Star Trek,
Warcraft
novels. Yeah. I think she's written some Warcraft novels.
Those kind of books
so
can be
so this
fun.
And so this kind of big. There's a term for them that I've heard before, but I can't think of it. But working with this kind of area where okay, there's this group of people, there's this set universe and set characters, and I kind of come in and maybe establish some new characters, but right to this existing universe. She does have plenty of experience doing that. Yeah,
and it's like she probably is not going to try to reinvent the wheel, but then you kind of arouse the reader by picking something that maybe let's answer like every great story, let's answer a question.
Mm-hmm.
That again, there's different levels when you write. Sometimes they're like, let's answer the big questions, and then sometimes it's a simple question. And it's honestly what I like about the idea of this is it lines up with a question I had at the end of Rogue One. Like, what happened to those other people?
Right.
What happened to Two Tubes? Did he die? Is Beezer Fortuna, did he get killed on Jedha? I hope not. They spent a lot of time establishing those guys who had dialogue. I think they just all took off. It'll be interesting to kind of, because I feel like, again, that was they didn't have the time in the movie to develop those characters to any great level, even though the aesthetic was fantastic. So I've got that in my mind's eye, and to, a simple, well-told Star Wars story, it's like, that's exactly kind of, like I said, I've always complained a little bit, like, they throw in these books about characters I don't care about. But this is one of these kind of scenarios are usually, it doesn't it's not a big deal. It's not really a liability. You can, like, they don't try to go, this is going to bridge the gap between this and that. It's like, no, they're just going to say, hey, remember these guys? Well, this is what happened. And I think that, you know, as long as it's not written in first person, which I'm not a fan of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will say, you know, with this new canon era, I definitely have liked a lot of the new characters that they've come up with, and been more interested in how they create these new characters and situate them within the kind of existing story, rather than, okay, let's give Luke something to do in between episodes 4 and 5, right? Like, I've been a little more on board with some of the newer characters they've done. So the fact that they're going to be hopefully developing a little more some of those, Saw Gerrera, troops from Rogue One, that's exciting. And then, maybe developing some new Imperial characters, that'll be good. Timothy Zahn did a little bit of that. He had, the 501st. There was I guess they ended up joining up with 501st, but it was Choices of One. And then there was another book he did where there was Mara Jade, and she got hooked up with this like 4 or 5 ex-Imperials who thought like the Empire had kind of lost its way, and they were on the side of justice or whatever, and so they kind of were on their own.
Was that called Allegiance?
Yeah, that was the first one. It was Allegiance and then Choices of One.
Okay, because I bought that. I haven't read that yet.
Yeah. And I like those. And yeah, like you said, the Karen Travis novels about the Republic commandos, the clone troopers.
Republic commandos.
I like those a lot. In general, I kind of am of the view of like, all right, yeah, like these are interesting character designs and kind of cool looking, but ultimately they're space Nazis, and maybe we fawn over them a little too much as fans, but I am going to be interested to see what this book is like. I haven't read any of her stuff besides Dark Disciple. Dark Disciple was not for me.
Apparently it wasn't for a lot of people. I've heard mixed reviews on that book.
And it was basically for like Asajj Ventress super fans, I think is who that book was for. But in fairness to Christy Golden, she was working from scripts that were outlined, or who knows how much work was done by other people, right? By was it Katie Lucas?
Yes.
And yeah,
yes.
It was Katie Lucas, and then whoever who was working on Clone Wars, Filoni or whomever who had input on her scripts, right? And so it wasn't clear to me like, okay, how much of this was Christy Golden's contribution and how much of this was her just like piecing together these different script outlines that she had gotten that someone else came up with and that they could get a book contract for. So I don't read Star Trek novels. I don't know if you do.
No, I've never really have. Star Trek to me has always been just like, I enjoy the TV show and kind of the movies. I don't ever go much deeper than that.
Right.
It's kind
of I don't. That is to say, I don't really know a lot about Christy Golden's writing on her own, but I'm willing to. Her having written Dark Disciple doesn't completely turn me off to the idea that like, oh, she's writing this book. It's not going to be any good.
Yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't her writing. Wasn't the liability in that. In that
right.
work.
And and you said you had a question about what happened to Saw Gerrera's people in the movie. I kind of did too, or at least I knew that they escaped, right? Because you see them like jumping into their X-wings even before Jin and Cassian and everyone else get picked up. Like they got off the planet first, I think.
Yeah, nobody offered
some of them did.
Nobody offered to carry Saw to their ship.
Right.
That's all right.
At least some of them did.
I'll stay here.
Maybe not all.
Just let me die.
Yeah. Right. It's his time. It's his time to face the music. He's an old man. There's not much of him left.
Well, you know what would have been funnier if it had just been him, and it's like all of a sudden that last shot, instead of save the rebellion, save the dream, it's just like, hold me, and then like Boar Gullet comes up
Everyone's
and
right.
like puts his tentacles around him.
I was actually just thinking, when I heard about this book, I was like, I wonder what happened to Boar Gullet, because he doesn't seem like he's very mobile.
Yeah.
Or he's mobile, but just not fast. Although, maybe he can cover ground. Octopi can cover ground pretty quickly, more quickly than you think, at least when they're underwater. So maybe he's the same way. But I also don't know like what ship was available for him to get off the planet.
Maybe he
must have gotten there somehow. I don't know. I don't think he's indigenous to Jeddah, so he must have gotten there somehow.
He's like he goes down a little hole into his own little ship or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
living.
Right,
it's the Flintstones thing.
Glass cover goes over him, and he fills the cockpit, and then it's just this tiny little beep, 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 beep.
Oh man, I think we need to pitch a book.
So what I was going to say is, before we found out about this, in my head, I was like, what would be a great idea? Because last week we talked about, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? We somehow those, Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, those anthologies came up, and I was, it would be great if they had done one of those, but for what happened to Saw's people after Rogue One, where did they end up? I guess it would be Tales from Jeddah or something, but
yeah,
or Tales from the Rebellion.
I would love another anthology.
But if they gave Beezer Fortuna a story, and they gave Two Tubes and his egg maid a story, and they gave Boar Gullet a story, and Wee Teef a story, that would be kind of that. I think that would be fun, and I kind of wonder why they haven't gone back to that idea. I mean, those short stories, at least some of them, were initially written for some website. I mean, they're essentially fan fiction that got officially sanctioned fan fiction. Once you got towards the later books, some of those I think were commissioned specifically for that purpose.
Yeah, and the fun as they got to what was it called? Was it Coruscant Nights or something like that? Or no, that's a different series.
Was that one of those short stories? I mean, I know there was those Coruscant Nights novels, but
those are different. I'm mistaking it.
I feel like the last of the Tales of was Tales of the New Republic, maybe.
Yeah,
and that was
pretty bad. I mean, I think the not the high water mark, but they did Tales of the Empire, and that was kind of
it's okay.
The shine was kind of wearing off, but yeah, the Tales from Jabba's Palace, the Tales of the Bounty Hunters, those 3 books are so much fun. I mean, if you can go out and get Tales from Jabba's Palace with this with the story of Gortog the Gamorrean, which I was
going to say, and your favorite character, the Rancor Keeper.
Yes, the Rancor Keeper, and the way the threads, kind of the Gortog the Gamorrean kind of guest stars in about half.
There's an overarching storyline across all of these different short stories, obviously, because they all have to do with the lead up to what happened in Jabba's Palace. But yeah, so I kind of wonder why they haven't done something like that, or at least, or maybe they are. Maybe they're thinking about it. Maybe they thought that's too much of an older idea, and they don't want to resurrect.
It's too inside baseball for Star Wars.
Its time has passed, but they had that one short story, The Perfect Weapon, about the Zine Natal from Maz's Castle, and then they had a couple of stories for younger readers about the Crimson Corsair and some of the other characters from Maz's Castle. But so I mean, I feel like it could work, or at least that kind of stuff is on their radar. It's just maybe they are waiting for
a lot of those didn't
more
come
appropriate, a bigger cast of characters that people can latch on to. I mean, because as much as we think that Saw Gerrera's people were great, I mean, we spent all that time on one episode just going over those Entertainment Weekly images of them and fawning over them. And as much as some people probably like Maz Kanata's Castle, I mean, that the reaction of those was nothing like it was for the Mos Eisley Cantina and even Jabba's Palace. Just all of the people going nuts over all the creature designs and things in there. And so maybe it's just that they don't think there's as much of an audience for them because they don't think the demand is there. But I think I hope it's something that they're exploring and are open to in the future, because I think more of those kinds of stuff could be fun, like you said.
Yeah, or they think that was the beginning of the end of the quality of our books, so we're just going to do like...
I don't, but see, I don't even feel like that was that late in the process.
Right, yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. I was trying to think, that's probably...
I mean, Tales from the New Republic was, I mean, they were pretty deep into the New Republic era by that point. That was 1999. Was Tales from the New Republic, but Tales from was Jabba's Palace first, or was Mos Eisley Cantina?
Mos Eisley was first, and like it looks like Jabba's Palace came out. Palace came out in December 1st of 1995.
Yeah,
so you're like,
yeah, and Mos Eisley Cantina was August 95,
and that's I think, so. Yeah, we're talking like 4 years into the new Star Wars. So that was not anthology.
That was not the beginning of the end. I don't think. I mean, that was by the time you get to Tales from the New Republic, that was maybe a lull, because that was like pre-Jedi Order. They hadn't really figured out what they were doing with yet. They were kind of stuck in this period where Han and Leia's kids were too young to like really contribute much other than get kidnapped, but they were kind of running out of things to do with Luke and Leia and Han and everyone else. I mean, the other issue is that then you have to find, 5, 6, 8 writers who are willing to do a short story. I mean, they're putting stuff in Star Wars Insider occasionally too, right? They had that series of Blade Squadron stories, which, I mean, were fine. They were not like the best writing in the world, but for what they were fine. But I feel like maybe you can contact some of those people who are kind of just starting out, or other people who science fiction fantasy writers who haven't done a Star Wars story yet, and maybe tell them like, look, this is your chance to like take this one character and just do whatever you want with them. I mean, because some of these tales of characters they didn't get too far out there, but they were not.
Well, I mean, I think that these kind of situations, these kind of books, right, when you at least in the time 22 years ago or whatever, mm-hmm, it's like when they didn't make a big deal about saying, well, it's all got to sync up with everything, then you could kind of have rough edges around it, where it didn't sync up, and you could try things. Right. You could change tone. You could make jokes, and it wouldn't like kind of make people go.
You could make Forlom a droid who like was trying to figure out how to use the Force. Right. Like that's kind of a crazy idea. And even now, like, I'm not sure how much I like that idea, but I liked that it was like kind of different and out there. Like, yeah, maybe a droid could try to use the Force. Well, like, it's not going to happen, but right, it's an interesting idea.
Well, and it's also, they're not selling these. They weren't selling the books of, if you're not reading these, then right, you're not getting the whole story. Where it's like, right, hey, if you'd like more, here's these books. It's kind of a different market. And I don't know about marketing. I feel like there's a kind of a different implied, I don't even know what the word I'm trying to think of. It's like implied a little bit more that you're missing out big time if you're not reading the books now. Whereas back then they're like, hey man, I know you love Star Wars. There's some great, it's like, it felt much more casual. Yeah. It was like, people were like, and of course there was a lot of fan fiction floating around. I'm sure there is now, but I think fan fiction has become much more specialized. Right. I don't know much about it, but all I hear about is like this term shipping. That's like the big thing in fan fiction now. Right. It's much more about relationships. It's not more about trying to
put these two characters together.
Yeah, let's have some smooching, and I'd rather have some shooting, but that's just I'm an old guy, so.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, personally, I think the Rancor Keeper's Tale and the IG-88 story that he wrote for the Bounty Hunters book, those were probably the best Star Wars things Kevin J. Anderson did. Right? So, like, you can still get, like, pretty fun stuff out of them. I don't know.
Well, you know what we got to do? We have to pitch we have to go to Disney Books and pitch our ideas for an anthology.
Yeah, that's right. We do.
Because I actually had an idea for a weird Clone Wars story of all things. But I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna say it on the show because not that I think anybody'd steal it. It's just I actually think it's a decent idea, and I rarely have those. But I'll tell you off air.
Well, that's something like in all these interviews, and we'll get to this in a second, because I know we've been talking for a while, but I do want to talk about the Star Wars Rebels episode.
Okay, let's just get into that. Yeah.
Well, Filoni keep hearing him talk about like, oh, such and such character, we spun off this whole story for them during Clone Wars that we didn't get to, and I feel like there's a lot of that for those Clone Wars characters. And so the fact that they didn't do one of those kinds of books for Tales from the Clone Wars, like, there's probably an opportunity for them to take some of the material they've already generated. Having said that, so Star Wars Rebels, Legacy of Mandalore. I didn't see this until just last night, but I had kind of seen some things hinting that like there was a big ending and a big twist or a reveal or big changes coming in this. And you and I had once we saw, okay, Sabine has the Blacksaber and she's going to go, do something with it. She's training how to use it. That's kind of a big step for this character, and it could be that we don't see this character for a while, right? I made an analogy to the show Dark Matter, and they had a character who became the emperor of his planet, and so he stopped. He's still on the show, but he's just not part of the crew of the ship anymore. And so we had talked about like, well, maybe that's what happens with Sabine. So Legacy of Mandalore, Sabine has the dark saber. She and Ezra, Kanan, and Fen Rao are on their way to Cronest, which is where her mother, the Countess Ren, and her family live. Obviously, or as we found out in the previous episode, she kind of left her family in acrimony, disgrace, however you want to put it. Basically, she had been at the Imperial Academy, found out that she was being trained to make weapons that were then being used against Mandalorians. She didn't like that. She left, and her family told her, well, we're standing with the Empire. You have to, you're no longer part of this family anymore, sort of. So she returns. It's kind of a tense meeting. We find out that there's a lot of, there's action in this movie, but there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of conversations. It's kind of a quiet episode, all things considered, but its repercussions are very loud. Right. So she's there. We meet Sabine's brother, Tristan. Sabine's mother basically tells everyone to stay where they are. She goes in the other room. She calls Gar Saxon, who's the current leader of the Mandalorians and collaborating with the Empire, tells them that she has the Jedi there and says, like, come get your Jedi, but, don't, leave my daughter out of it. And he says, oh, your family will be well taken care of, which anyone who's seen any movie with a bad guy in it knows that means that he's going to kill them or something along those lines. So he shows up, and indeed he, does that very thing. He briefly gets control of the Darksaber because Sabine gave it to her mother because she wanted her mother to kind of unite Mandalore, I guess, who then gave it to Gar Saxon. So then there's a lightsaber duel between Gar Saxon and Sabine, which is kind of interesting. And Sabine ends up defeating Gar Saxon, walks away, or takes the Darksaber from him. He gets shot by Sabine's mother. Sorry, there's spoilers throughout this. So Gar Saxon, the leader of the Mandalorians, is now dead. And Sabine says, well, I have to stay here with my family. We Mandalorians need to sort this out. Because now the leader of the Mandalorians is dead. We kind of need to figure out what's going to happen. Hopefully, I'll get this settled, or, figured out. And then hopefully the Mandalorians can then come help the rebellion. So that's it. So she stays on Mandalore. Fen Rao also stays on Mandalore. And that's the end of the episode. And so Kanan and Ezra say their goodbyes, and they head back to the crew of the Ghost. So that is, as we'd kind of thought, that is a big change for that character and for the Ghost crew. Dave Filoni, both on the Rebels Recon, and then he did an interview with the Nerdist's website. Was talking about this episode a little more, and he basically said, like, yeah, we're not done with Sabine. We're not done with this Mandalorian story. He has spent a lot more time thinking about the Mandalorians than he thought he would post Clone Wars. He basically said as much, that we are going to see the character Bo-Katan Kryze. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was a character from the Clone Wars. She was voiced by Katie Sackhoff. So she's going to be back on the show. And she was, I looked her up briefly. So she was part of the Mandalorian Death Watch group. But then when Maul took over Mandalore, she basically asked Obi-Wan to tell the Republic about what was happening, because she preferred Republic intervention into Mandalorian business over Maul being in charge of everything, right? And so she's basically the one, I'm extrapolating here, who got them to the situation where they are now, and Gar Saxon being in charge, and the Imperials taking over Mandalore, et cetera, et cetera. One of the interesting things, and right, you all know, if you've been listening for a while, my relationship with the Clone Wars, so I'm guessing at some of these things I just said don't mean a lot to me, but if you watch the Clone Wars, you understand what all of that means. One of the other interesting things that Dave Filoni said was that just kind of situating Sabine and her family and where they sit within kind of Mandalorian culture, right? So they are not actually from Mandalore. They are, he said basically, or I think Pablo Hidalgo said, there are like 1,000 systems or 1,000 planets in the Mandalorian system, Mandalorian Empire, right? So then Filoni was saying, the Wrens are not from Mandalore, but they're one of those planets that Mandalore conquered. So they're very loyal to Mandalore, but others may not see them as totally being, Mandalorian or what have you. He didn't make this connection, but I was thinking a lot about kind of Europe and the old European empires, and the fact that Sabine's mother was a countess. So she has some degree of rank, but the rank doesn't mean a lot. He said he intentionally wanted the look of the Wren clan. Their uniforms were a little grayer and a little worn down and everything, because they've kind of fallen on hard times, and they're not as prominent as they once were. I should also mention, in this episode we find out that either Gar Saxon or the Imperials, someone is holding Sabine's father captive, basically to keep the Wren clan in line. So we'll see what happens with that. And the other thing Filoni said was that, right, so Wren is Sabine's mother's name, and because she was higher ranking, she had more money. So Sabine's father married into the Wren clan and basically just took that name because they had the higher status. So that's also this kind of very like old Europe, royal family kind of, or not royal family, but like peerage class system of, marrying well, and which name do you go by, and, who's a countess and who's an earl and all that kind of stuff. So it certainly sounds like we will be seeing and hearing more from the Mandalorians in the future on Star Wars Rebels. So what did you think of this episode, Robert? And what do you think about the direction then that they're going with this?
Well, when I first got done with the episode, I was kind of like, I don't know if I thought there was some interesting stuff, but then as time goes on, I'm like, this was actually, it was a nice a chance for Sabine to have something with a bit of gravitas that, like her training thing, which I was pretty hard on the training episode where she was learning to use the Darksaber, because I guess maybe I didn't realize that she was going to be having to use it so soon, that kind of thing. In retrospect,
and who knows how much time has passed between within the universe between that episode and this one.
I mean, it's interesting. I wish I could gotten a little bit, she lets the cat out of the bag a couple episodes before about how they all turned their back on her. I just wish we had gotten a little bit more. I mean, they got 22 minutes. I'm not going to roast them over the coals they had a lot of story for kind of thing. And to be perfectly honest, the Mandalorian stuff has not been as fleshed out on Rebels as say it was in the Clone Wars. And like you, I just, for some reason, I have a lot of trouble connecting to Clone Wars as a thing that sticks with
Which
me.
is, I mean, and to go back to what we were saying, I really liked those Karen Traviss clone trooper novels that did go into her vision of what ended up being her own vision of Mandalorian culture and everything.
Right.
But then when it got to the Clone Wars, it just became, for whatever reason, for me, it just became too convoluted and like, I just don't care enough about Death Watch versus Night Owls versus whatever.
Yeah.
And then when Maul got involved, then I was definitely like,
it muddied the water so much that you're just like, I'm never going to make heads or tails of this. I mean, like I said, I had called it before that I think, maybe Sabine will be stepping aside. I mean, I'm glad to hear that this isn't like the end of her. I will say that I had my one nitpick, and this isn't a story. This isn't really a nitpick. Well, maybe it is because they wrote the words, but the idea that she kicked, what's that guy's name? I kept calling him Fetty Wap. Who's the guy?
Fen Rao.
Fen Rao, that's it. I kept thinking it's like, it's that guy. Anyway, Fen Rao, he's kind of used strangely. Like he can't, I guess he is kind of like, if he showed up the minute that she goes, hi, and when I brought Fen Rao, it would have been completely changed the tone of the story. But her fighting Gar Saxon or whatever was, it was interesting. It's, she had trained and it's like that whole kind of like, we can't interfere. It's between the two of them. I like that. And it's like, she really had a chance to kind of, show that the things that we don't know who her father is yet, because we haven't seen him, but it's like, whatever it is about the mother and the stuff that, she is a product of that warrior class, but because she's been on her own, she's added, you get the feeling that Mandalorians are just, they're kind of speciesists, it's like the idea that they're really into their culture. There's probably not a lot of like, people from other planet, other non-human or whatever groups.
It's very insular.
Yeah, it's that kind of like, it's almost kind of like the royal families of yore. There's not a lot of fresh blood. But at the end, so she's got her darksaber, and then she immediately like, I'm not worthy to wield it. Now I understand it. This might be her setting up for another adventure where she actually realizes it's important for her to take up the mantle, and that all along she is the future of Mandalore, and that again might be the final act in her thing, because that's the idea. But we also know that the Mandalorians, at least in I mean, I don't know, because it's like, it's so nebulous now with this kind of with all these new stories coming out. But I mean, it's not like Mandalorians factored into the original trilogy at all, except for one dude who was a bounty hunter. It's like he basically created nothing but problems for our heroes. So we know he's not, Boba Fett was never got involved in that. So, I mean, I guess, no, I mean, I think it was good. I just feel like, okay, well, this is just the preamble to something much bigger.
Yeah.
So in that way, it was kind of like, well, there's a lot of people standing around, and but it's good to see family relationships, which is direct family relationships, like parents and children, which I've said before has never been a big thing in Star Wars. It's like either it's the distance, it's the we don't know who our father is, or we've been lied to about who our father is, or we see our father and they die, or we see our mother and she dies, and it's that kind of like everything is like interrupted. It's never resolved, and I feel like this was a good example of a mother and a daughter kind of like coming to like, okay, I think they understand each other now, you know, and I think that was good in that respect. But I guess it would have sounded a little weird if Sabine had taken the thing and said, I'm going to, all of a sudden she'd taken on the boon of like, I'm going to reunite Mandalore against the Empire. It wouldn't have been consistent with the character.
Yeah.
Who's, you know, in retrospect, when you think about it, she, in some emotional things, Sabine's a bit more meek than you would naturally think. She definitely has, you know, when she sees injustice, she'll speak out on it. But she also, I think, she might have learned a little bit from what happened when with the thing with Hobby and Wedge. Like maybe I need to play a little closer to the vest when I'm in quote enemy territory, because that was a criticism I had of that episode. It's like, boy, she's pretty lippy for somebody who's trying to be undercover. Right. So maybe it's...
Well, and you know, she's certainly a key part of the Ghost Crew, but she was never like, hey, put me in a position of leadership, right? She certainly, there was that episode with Hera where, you know, she was like, hey, keep me in the loop and tell me what mission, you know, why we're going on these missions. But, you know, Hera was the leader and she was happy with that. She wasn't like Ezra, who, you know, keeps wanting to be the leader of these missions, you know, himself, you know. So yeah, to have her then say like, well, I'm going to be the one to unite Mandalore would have seemed out of character for her.
Yeah, so I mean, that's you're right. You know, and I think
you're right in that sense, and you said it.
I think Dave.
No, you're correct.
No, you're correct. You're the smartest Star Wars podcaster. No, it's I just feel like that got weird. Yeah, it did. No,
regardless, Dave Filoni.
Dave Filoni. I think maybe he's got an interesting. Maybe he's got more to tell. You know, I always feel like it's like I need to realize that there's going to be more episodes coming up, and it's not just like, well, they didn't resolve it now. Obviously, they're completely screwing this up. Whereas, like, I keep thinking like, oh, this is going to be like we're going to find out like, oh, they're going to stop doing this show. But I think they're at least they're in production on 4. So you know,
yeah. I mean, it's given what Filoni said about we'll see more, we'll hear more about that in the future. Like, I assume that means a 4th season. I mean, because they only have, I think, a handful of episodes left.
Yeah, I didn't read the breakdown of like, because I know that they kind of let out the titles and the descriptions of the last. Are there 2 more episodes? Yeah. Are there only 2 more episodes this season?
No, there might be. Oh, I don't know.
Maybe 3.
That's a good question.
I was kind of I kind of saw the list and I was like, wait a second, we're kind of.
These are very descriptive titles.
Yeah, exactly.
You did mention Fen Rao though, and you know, kind of the weirdness of him being there. He kind of didn't have much to do. Like, his job was to hide, steal back the Jedi's lightsabers, and give them to them when they needed them. Like, that's kind of why he was there. But Filoni talked a little bit I think it was in the Nerdist interview about kind of the group dynamic and how that's going to change without Sabine around, and you know how it's going to affect everyone, her absence, and how they'll react. But I think Fen Rao's absence is going to be interesting too. Not that he was a huge part of the show, but at least for a little while there, you had you had kind of Kanan and Rex competing for Ezra's attention, and then you threw Fen Rao in there too, and he was kind of more of a natural ally for Rex, maybe in being a warrior and all, that being an important part of Ezra's training. And now that he's gone, I kind of wonder what that will do to that dynamic of Ezra and his mentors, and his relationship with Kanan, his relationship with Rex, and kind of how that plays into it. Again, not that I think it's going to be like a huge difference, because Fen Rao was not a big part of other episodes that didn't involve like Sabine, but I think that is still something to maybe look for in the future. And but yeah, this issue of who's mentoring Ezra and who's competing to mentor Ezra and how that's changed over time.
Well, yeah, and in some ways they're setting up this kind of idea that the characters aren't necessarily going to end up where you think they belong. Where it's kind of like, yo, this person's going to be his mentor. Well, then it kind of doesn't. And then it's like, I think it's kind of, in some subtle way, because it's like that nagging question with this is like, how do we dispense with, Ezra and Kanan as being Jedi? It's like, well, at the end, they're not going to be Jedi. How do they do that without killing them? I mean, of course, then again, I never thought that they were going to kill off all of our heroes in Rogue One. I thought, well, how are they going to deal with this? How were they going to come up with an excuse why they weren't in, the original trilogy? And it's like, oh, it's going to be something very subtle. They'll go out on a mission or something, and then they'll write it off in a book or something. And it's like, nope, they're just going to kill them off. Not that I'm thinking anybody's going to get killed off, but it's I think they're kind of changing like the idea that like, oh, so-and-so is going to be here and so-and-so is going to be there. And it's obvious and it's just building toward it. Cause then they can do something like this Legacy of Mandalore where it's like, okay, well, maybe I did predict that the Darksaber made me think that she was going to head off to help her people. But we also don't know where she's going to end up at the end of this. If she doesn't want to run Mandalore, maybe she'll fix it all and then she'll just pass it over to her brother or something. I don't know. I mean, the brother character was a little underdeveloped in my opinion, so maybe that means they're leaving some meat on the bone. So I guess his name is Tristan or something like that. Maybe that's still some unresolved stuff. I see that we actually technically have 6 episodes, which is including a double, so the 17 through 22. So yeah, it's going to be a straight shot from the 25th of this month to the 25th of next month. So they still got, about, an hour, 2.5 hours worth of story to tell here. So there's a lot.
Yeah. And next week, we're going back to Thrawn and Fulcrum. Like there's that story going on. And then we have to go back to the Maul, Tatooine Vision, the story, like they have these multiple storylines going on, except they kind of don't because they just drop one of them for a couple episodes and then pick it back up.
It makes you wonder why they spent time with stuff like Iron Squadron when they have so much compelling, big story type stuff they could play around with, and then like, wow, let's do an episode just about these kids that fly an alternate
Ezra. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So, and then the other character I think it will be interesting to look for is Zeb, right? Because he and Sabine were kind of a natural pairing on that ship, where it's like, all right, if we need someone to split off and create a diversion with bombs and guns, it's Sabine and Zeb, right? And so now that Sabine's gone, Zeb is kind of in that role by himself, but at the same time, he wasn't necessarily like the weapons expert bomb maker guy either. So when you talked about people kind of leaving the show, I mean, he was one that I was honestly a little surprised that, that episode from last season with the he found the other Lasats and they go to, a new planet. You could say in retrospect, it's maybe a little surprising that he didn't stay with them. Right. And so maybe that's why, maybe that ultimately ends up being what happens with him too, is that, at a certain point he's like, look, I have to go be with my people and start rebuilding with them and splits off himself. But, you could see all these different ways that, I think Hera and Kanan certainly are kind of at the core of the Rebels story, and Ezra to a certain extent. Even though Hera is like barely on the show anymore. But in terms of that group, and we know she survives to Yavin at least. So, the rest of them, Zeb, Sabine, maybe even Kanan, maybe even Ezra, at a certain point, if they need to leave the show, not permanently, but their character goes off and kind of does their own thing. Maybe that's the direction they go in, and they still are able to maintain the core idea of what the show is.
Yeah.
I think Ezra and Kanan will stick around for a while, but everything else is kind of up for grabs. Is one of the signals that this episode sends, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I took away from it at the end, because at first I was like, oh, kind of felt a little slow, but now I'm like, no, this is actually kind of the crux or the nexus of a lot of divergent storylines going forward. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see. I haven't really I don't want to go through the synopsis of everything else, but where are we going to get? I was kind of like to see if we get a little bit more Hera this season. I feel like, again, it's like we got a little taste of her when she on that with the thing on Ryloth or whatever, but now that we're down one female crew member, it's kind of like, the balance is kind of changed a little bit. Right. So I don't know if that means that they might,
there's that too.
They might play up the relationship between Kanan and Hera a little bit, maybe a little bit of that kind of doomed romance or whatever, or maybe we'll have another, I haven't seen anything where any big in any of the trailers. It was like a big reveal for a new crew member or something. So maybe they'll just, stick with a kind of a one crew member down,
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much all we have on that, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we talked about a lot, and people might have opinions and they might want to email us. So if you want to do that, best thing to do, hosts, that's HOSTS, at talkingbirdcast.com. We're on Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have we actually have a YouTube. We're on Stitcher, but if you're already listening to us, you know how to listen to us. We are also on YouTube. If you Google Talking Birdcast, Talking Bird, the special edition, the YouTube page will come out. Sometimes I put the link on our Twitter. The reason I bring it up is I'd kind of like to get some subscribers, because if you get more subscribers, it opens up your ability to customize your page a little better. If you only have, like right now, we only have like 3 subscribers, which I think one of them is me. But if you get a certain amount, then you get to open up, you can customize your page a little bit better and use a custom URL. I'd like to do that. So even if it's not something you consume, I'd appreciate if you'd go over there if you have the time and just give us a quick subscribe. We also have an Amazon affiliate link, which is www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. If you know how those work, it's a portal into Amazon where you make a purchase and then we get a percentage of it. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it's just a small way to offset the cost of hosting your favorite Star Wars long-winded podcast. That's long-winded is me, not John. He's very concise.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all we got for this week. Did you have anything you wanted to add, John?
No, just as always, thanks for listening. Drop us a line if you have stuff you just want to chat about with us. We say things you like or don't like, or you're like, oh yeah, I remember that thing. I have a feeling about that. Drop us a line. Tell us what you
always. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you always.